And so it's very likely that in the next couple months, by Iraqi decree, U.S. forces could be legally evicted from the country. And so that is a roundabout solution, of way of getting out of the Middle East. Hello everybody, I'm Mango Thunderslice, and today we're talking about the unfolding situation in the Middle East, right? As most of you have undoubtedly heard by now, one of the top Iranian generals, what they're saying, the #2 guy in the country, Qassem Soleimani, was killed in an airstrike in Baghdad, pretty much at the Baghdad airport. Pretty brazen move, apparently ordered by Trump. When it first came out, Space Panther hurt me in the kitchen. I was like, oh shit. Because unlike a lot of the Twitterati commenting on this, I've known who Qassem Soleimani is for a long time. He's been one of the most instrumental operators in the Middle East, since the last time Iraq and Iran were at war together, pretty much. And yeah, so at first I almost expected Israel to just take credit for the strike, because this is pretty out there and unexpected. But, then Trump says, nope, it was us, we did it. So this is him. Qassem Soleimani right here. Definitely a scary looking dude. Definitely was a scary dude. He was the leader of the Quds force in Iran, one of their main, architects of their external military operations, right? The Iraqi militias, the popular mobilization forces that he was traveling with, I guess the head of the PMF, Abu Mahdi Mohandes, and that guy, Mahdi Mohandes, was also killed in the airstrike. And again, this was literally right at the Baghdad airport. Pretty intense, intense violation of Iraq's sovereignty. And, this is where, again, you guys who have followed the channel, I view Trump positively. I do see the 5D chess narrative to be actually the most rational and simple explanation of the paths that we've seen taken. And, maybe I'm just an optimist, but I do believe that this is going to turn out to be something in the same line of something that appears to be leading us directly into war, but is actually a very complicated way of getting us out of the Middle East and preventing war. Just like Trump said, again, you can think he's just an idiot and all of this is just random and there's no method to any of it. Or you can kind of see beyond the chaos and see the strategy of the pieces moving on the board. And we'll see. Again, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe this is the beginning of war with Iran, but I don't think so. Because Trump knows probably better than any politician that the United States has ever seen the negative consequences, not just in terms of geopolitics, but in terms of his reelection if he actually were to proceed with a full-scale war. So, again, we'll see, but we're just going to cover some of the happenings right now. So, yeah, that's Qassem Soleimani. And so, yeah, how Trump planned the drone strike with a tight circle of aides. This is from Bloomberg. The Iranian general had long been considered untouchable by the United States, but a U.S. contractor death on December 27th was the red line for Trump. His stature as the second most powerful person in Iran made him almost untouchable in the eyes of Donald Trump's predecessors. That long-standing U.S. restraint ended in dramatic fashion Thursday with Trump's order to launch a nighttime airstrike in Baghdad that killed Soleimani and drive tensions with Iran to the boiling point. The president's decision to target the powerful head of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Quds Force came together swiftly following the death of an American contractor in a rocket attack by an Iranian-backed militia against a U.S. base in Iraq. Soon after the attack, Trump ordered a handful of his most senior aides to begin planning a strike on the Iranian general, according to 3 people familiar with the matter. The Trump administration had recently asked France and other allies to warn Tehran against killing Americans, according to one of the people. For the president, a red line had been crossed. Trump's close circle of national security advisors was scattered across the country for the holidays. Acting Chief of Staff Mick Mulvaney was in Key West, National Security Advisor Robert O'Brien was in California, and Secretary of State Mike Pompeo was in Washington, after canceling plans to travel to Ukraine and other countries on January 1st. While Soleimani's death has been cheered by many of Trump's supporters and his congressional allies, Democrats say the president's decision risks endangering American diplomats and troops in the Middle East and beyond. Within the Trump administration, there is even concern about Iranian reprisals within U.S. borders. Over the weekend or earlier this week, Trump ordered elements of the 82nd Airborne Division to the Middle East. About 750 paratroopers were notified Tuesday they would be deployed. Security was enhanced at Mar-a-Lago, according to 2 people familiar with the matter. No foreign governments were notified of the attack ahead of time. U.S. officials say that Soleimani was coming to Baghdad to prepare for further attacks on American forces. The U.S. and several other countries track his movements, and he was believed to have arrived in the Iraqi capital from a third country in the region, either Lebanon or Syria. A U.S. official said the military wasn't directly monitoring Soleimani over the past week, but launched a strike when intelligence indicated he'd be at the Baghdad airport, in military lexicon, a target of opportunity. The U.S. would have known as soon as he landed in Baghdad, according to 2 people familiar with the matter. Soleimani was the primary target of the strike just outside the Baghdad airport, which also killed the leader of Kataib Hezbollah militia that attacked the American military base. Right, and they're, given kind of the spiel that, Soleimani was plotting an imminent attack against Americans and whatnot. And, Trump basically said, "We took action last night to stop a war. We did not take action to start a war." So, basically now the red flag of jihad raised as thousands mourn the death of Soleimani in Baghdad. A little ominous. Apparently it's normally a blue flag, and now it's the red flag of jihad. Retaliation has already started. Multiple mortar attacks on U.S. presence in Iraq. Hezbollah warns security forces stay away. So they're basically telling the Iraqi soldiers and the Iraqi military, stay away from the base. Don't be human shields for the Crusaders, otherwise we'll have to take you out too. And so it's definitely a real situation. Here's a diagram of the green zone in Baghdad, where the U.S. embassy is, in the Iraqi parliament. And again, it's very interesting that there was this whole protest against the U.S. embassy, right, with all these people supposedly attacking the embassy. This is in a very heavily fortified zone, surrounded by, almost 2/3 of the sides by the Tigris River. So highly defensible, but for some reason all those people were allowed to get through. Right. So it is quite a situation. And Iraqi parliament this morning, at least in our time, Iraqi parliament has voted in favor of expelling U.S. troops from the country. The vote poses a pivotal test to American forces that have been instrumental in the defeat of Islamic State. The funny thing is that who was really instrumental in the defeat of Islamic State, in addition to, I guess, the U.S. forces under Trump, is Qassem Soleimani and the Iranians, right? Those are probably the 2, and the Russians, right? So it's just funny, again, how they tried to use this anti-terrorism spiel for all their war games, but now it's like, Iran and Russia are 2 of the most, and the Kurds, right, are some of the best people at fighting actual terrorists. But, the narrative may have worked well in 2004 and 2005, but it's really falling apart now that, everyone's calling the bluff. Iraq's parliament voted, and this is from Wall Street Journal, Iraq's parliament voted in favor of expelling U.S. troops after the killing of an Iranian general there and a U.S. airstrike put the country at the center of an escalating conflict between its 2 most important allies. Lawmakers backed a resolution urging Prime Minister Adel Abdul Mahdi to rescind Iraq's invitation to U.S. forces, which returned to Iraq in 2014 after Islamic State overran around 1/3 of the country. Mr. Abdul Mahdi resigned late last year as Prime Minister and has since presided over a caretaker government, meaning the decision about whether to evict the U.S. troops might fall to his successor. Addressing the session before the vote Sunday, Mr. Abdul Mahdi advised the Parliament to support the motion. Though it has no legal force, the vote casts further doubt on the future of an American troop presence that has been instrumental in the defeat of Islamic State, even as powerful Iranian-backed factions have come to dominate the government. One of those militias, Kataib Hezbollah, threatened lawmakers who failed to show up at the session or vote in favor of the resolution, branding them traitors. A senior State Department official early this week said the U.S. was working with its Iraqi allies to prevent the vote taking place, characterizing the killing of Major General Qassem Soleimani as supporting the sovereignty of Iraq against Iran. Again, they are getting really ballsy and brazen with some of these statements that, that it was denied by the Iraqi government, the strike. It was in their own airport and their capital city. And this is, this is for your own sovereignty, right? Wow. I don't know if even if I were, up there with these people, I don't know if I could make a claim like that with a straight face. And here's a quote. We'd certainly be very disappointed if there was some sort of adverse decision by the Iraqi parliament, said National Security Advisor Robert O'Brien before the vote. We've invested a lot in the future of Iraq and the friendship that we have with the Iraqi people, so we're looking forward and hopeful that we'll have a good relationship with Iraq going forward. End quote. The strike in Baghdad that killed General Soleimani and a top Iraqi paramilitary leader has raised the possibility of direct confrontation between the U.S. and Iran. With its top two allies increasingly at odds, the Iraqi government faces the prospect of deciding whether it remains a partner for the West or ends up firmly in the Iranian camp. The U.S. strike also cast doubt on the durability of the U.S.-led campaign against Islamic State at a time when the militants are seeking to regroup in Iraq and Syria after being defeated militarily. Iran has vowed to retaliate for the killing, raising fears of wider conflict across the region, where the slain commander of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Foreign Wing cultivated a network of proxies that could be activated to strike U.S. interests. Hard days and nights are awaiting them, said Yahya Rahim Safavi, former commander of the Revolutionary Guard and senior advisor to Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, in a speech quoted by state television. The Americans must leave West Asia, the Middle East, in disgrace and defeat. On Saturday, rockets landed near two Iraqi bases where U.S. forces are stationed, causing no casualties but serving as a reminder of the increasingly hostile climate for American troops. Kataib Hezbollah has given Iraqi security forces a deadline of Sunday evening to move at least 1 kilometer, 0.62 miles, away from bases where American troops are stationed, urging military commanders not to allow their soldiers to serve as human shields for the U.S. Iraqi security forces have been unable to prevent a spate of rocket attacks targeting those bases in recent months, which U.S. officials blame on Kataib Hezbollah. Quote, "We have increased security and defensive measures at the Iraqi bases that host anti-ISIS coalition troops," read a statement from the U.S.-led coalition, confirming Saturday's attacks on Baghdad's Green Zone and Balad Air Base, located about 40 miles north of the capital. The U.S. has about 5,000 troops in Iraq as part of an international coalition that was invited by the country's former prime minister after Islamic State overran around one-third of the country in 2014. 2 years have passed since Iraq claimed victory over Islamic State, but the coalition has remained to help prevent a resurgence and to train Iraqi security forces. The resolution demands the Iraqi government cancel the request for help it presented to the international coalition to fight ISIS. Several dozen lawmakers held prayers for Mr. Mohandes and General Soleimani inside the parliament ahead of the vote. Shiite political leaders who control a majority of seats in the parliament condemned the U.S. strike as a violation of sovereignty, but some also have misgivings about the growing dominance of Iran-backed factions and see Washington as a necessary counterweight to Tehran's influence. Along with many Kurdish and Sunni lawmakers, they worry a withdrawal of U.S. troops would enable a resurgence of Islamic State and lead to Iraq's isolation. The reaction from Kurdish and Sunni politicians to General Soleimani's killing has been relatively muted, and they were not visible at a funeral procession for him and Mr. Mohandes on Saturday. So yeah, beyond that, Lindsey Graham was given notice, I guess, of the strike, and his response was to go full neocon and tell them to hit the oil refineries and crush the Iranian economy, right? Lindsey Graham is absolutely a swamp creature who, since his boyfriend John McCain died, he's been trying to essentially play close to Trump and rebrand himself, because I think he realizes that he has far fewer, ultra arch neocon allies in the Senate and the government in general, at least on the Republican side, because more and more, as we've talked about here, and many others have, pretty much the entire right wing at this point is awakened to the nature of Israeli influence on this country and how it is not a healthy level of influence, and that many of the wars that the United States has fought, which the United States has no interest in the Middle East, really. I mean, again, we're producing copious amounts of oil. The war was never about oil per se. It was about the currency that oil is priced in. And that is, beyond the scope of who actually consumes the oil, and ultimately beyond the scope of what the U.S. military should be doing. But again, it's the petrodollar, it's the euro dollar. The dollar is the world reserve currency. It's not just used in the United States, it's used around the world. And the thing that's backing the dollar is the United States military and the energy resources that are priced in that currency. So, yeah, basically oil priced in dollars and the United States military to defend essentially the energy, oil and gas markets and empire. That's essentially the rough structure of the economic empire when it comes to energy and currency. right? Trump has kind of echoed the hawkish attitude, and in the Roy Cohn model, punch them harder than they punch you. And so, yeah, Trump says no more threats. 52 targets will be hit very fast and hard. And so, following today's mortar attacks and bellicosity from various Iranian and Iran-backed leaders, President Trump has responded in words for now, warning Iran in 3 short words: no more threats. Iran is talking very boldly about targeting certain USA assets as revenge for our ridding the world of their terrorist leader. Trump then reminded his followers just exactly what Soleimani had done. Soleimani had just killed an American and badly wounded many others, not to mention all of the people he had killed over his lifetime, including recently hundreds of Iranian protesters. He was already attacking our embassy and preparing for additional hits in other locations. Iran has been nothing but problems for many years. Then came the warning. Let this serve as a warning that if Iran strikes any Americans or American assets, we have targeted 52 Iranian sites representing the 52 American hostages taken by Iran many years ago, some at a very high level and important to Iran and the Iranian culture, and those targets and Iran itself will be hit very fast and very hard. The USA wants no more threats. Not quite as aggressive as the fire and fury tweet directed at North Korea, but with the red flag of jihad flying in Iran, we suspect they get the message from the US president. Of course, as Politico's Rim Momtaz explained earlier, no one knows for sure what happens next, even those who will decide some of the next steps. The Iranian regime is not suicidal, it is strategic, calculating even if it miscalculates sometimes, so likelihood of an all-out direct US-Iran war is low. Khamenei promised a response. It must be strong enough to save face internally for a regime already strained and facing popular dissent, and also be calibrated to avoid provoking a U.S. response inside Iran. Iran's response will show whether deterrence restored. The myth of invincibility that Iran built around Soleimani was a huge recruitment tool. It may also now turn out to be a double-edged sword. How does its most valiant warrior, its most effective U.S. challenger, get picked off so precisely by the U.S.? Concern for U.S. military, diplomatic personnel, and citizens in the region is legitimate, but allowing it to dictate policy plays into Iran's hands, which weaponizes Western sensitivity to human loss and war weariness to further destabilize the region unchecked. There are many so-called anti-imperialists who always criticize Western intervention but justify Iranian-Russian intervention. Iran is not a legit actor in Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Yemen. Its crimes there are no less reprehensible than those by the U.S. or colonialists. Iran is set to announce its next violations of the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the Iran nuclear deal, in the next few days. That's another thing to look out for other than a military retaliation in wake of the Soleimani killing. Will it escalate to the point of affecting breakout time or not? And I don't know if I agree with that second to last paragraph, right? I'm pretty sure Iran has a mutual defense pact with Syria, and that's why they were operating there. I think they also have one with Lebanon. Yemen and Iraq, I don't know about that. But again, in Iraq, you have the Popular Mobilization Forces, the head of which was taken out in the same airstrike. And the article concludes here from Zero Hedge. Trump's warning follows Hezbollah Secretary General Sayed Hassan Nasrallah's comments stressing that avenging Soleimani and the other martyrs is a duty of resistance mujahideen around the world. And so to show just kind of the whole charade that's going on, right, Tim Kaine and the rest of these Democrats who are always pro-war in their own right are now, positioning themselves as anti-war, and he introduces a resolution to block war with Iran, which, in a vacuum, I would support. I just have no confidence that the running mate of Hillary Clinton is actually anti-war, right? It's all just posturing. This is something I had to learn when I was, back in high school. Is the Democrats will pretend to be anti-war until they're in charge, and then they're basically humanitarian imperialists, right? It's disgusting. Senator Tim Kaine, Democrat of Virginia, a member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, on Friday announced a resolution to block President Trump from further escalating hostilities with Iran. The resolution is privileged, which means Republicans cannot block it from reaching the floor, and comes the day after the surprise drone strike that killed Iranian General Qassem Soleimani, the leader of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps' elite Quds Force. Iranian Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei has vowed forceful revenge against the U.S., and the Pentagon announced Friday that it will send 3,000 additional troops to the Middle East. Kaine's resolution requires that any hostilities with Iran must be explicitly authorized by a congressional declaration of war or a specific authorization for the use of military force, though it does not prevent the United States from defending itself from imminent attack, according to a summary of the measure released by his office. And here's the hilarious quote. Quote, "For years I've been deeply concerned about President Trump stumbling into war with Iran. We're now at a boiling point, and Congress must step in before Trump puts even more of our troops in harm's way," Kaine, the 2016 Democratic vice presidential nominee, said in a statement. "We owe it to our service members to have a debate and vote about whether or not it's in our national interest to engage in another unnecessary war in the Middle East," he added. Again, with those words in a vacuum, 100% agree. But again, it's just very interesting that the warmongering Democrats are now, going against this, for the sake of their own posturing, right? Usually, the last time that Trump launched airstrikes against Syria, everyone, basically praised him. But now we're later in the first term, and everything must be weaponized against Trump. And it ultimately doesn't really matter. What's going to prevent war with Iran isn't Tim Kaine and his, partisan, positioning. It's basically the weapons technology situation on the ground. So this is from May 30th of Russia rejected Iran S-400 missile request amid Gulf tension, right? And I covered this, 2 videos ago in the Future of War and Geopolitics, that these Russian military systems are so advanced at this point that they can take out all of the American air power and essentially nullify that as an advantage and make it so that any air, war campaign will be met with extreme casualties and loss of, not just the lives of many pilots and other, operators, but also millions and millions of dollars of military assets. These planes that cost billions of dollars to make are going to go down in flames as a result of these advanced weapon systems if a war comes to pass. And so this was from May 30th, that essentially Putin was like, no, maybe we don't sell you these just yet, And then basically 1 month later, Russia offers Iran the advanced S-400 air defense weapons. Yeah, so this was from June 30th, 2019, and now it's 2020, so mid last year. Moscow invites Tehran to bid for S-400 aid defense systems. Neither the U.S. nor Israel figures in those reports, or last week's deployment of U.S. F-22 stealth jets to Qatar amid a tense U.S.-Iran standoff. So yeah, you thought it was tense back then. Oh, well, welcome to 2020. And Russia said, "We are open for discussions on delivering S-400 Triumph air defense systems, including to Iran. We have not received an official request from our partners on this matter yet." So if they haven't received the official request yet, I would imagine they're probably receiving it right now. The advanced S-400 can intercept cruise missiles as well as warplanes. It is now on offer to Iran, although Moscow refused to supply them to the Islamic Republic last month. This turnabout has come about shortly after Presidents Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin met in Osaka on the sidelines of the G20 summit, and indicates they made no progress toward bringing their differences on the Iranian and Syria issues. The offer also signified the failure of the American, Russian, and Israeli national security advisors John Bolton, Nikolai Patrushev, and Mir Ben-Shabbat to reach a consensus on these issues when they met in Jerusalem 5 days ago. On that occasion, Patrushev stated that Moscow has an interest in safeguarding Israel's security. Our military forces note that Tehran may find an opportunity to accept Moscow's proposition in the course of the 5th International Military Technical Forum taking place at the National Park in the Russian capital, with the participation of 120 nations and armies. If this transaction does indeed go through, Iran will be the second Middle East nation to purchase the Russian S-400 weapon system after Turkey, which expects delivery before the end of this year. In Osaka, our military sources add, President Trump told Turkish President Recep Erdogan that Washington has withdrawn the threat of sanctions on his government for purchasing S-400s from Russia, although it is the first NATO member to buy arms from Moscow. So again, that was from 6 months ago. In the video we did 2 videos ago, Future of War and Geopolitics, those sanctions are now set to go through. Not because Mr. Trump wants them, but because the United States Congress wants them. And essentially, they refuse to deliver any of the advanced stealth F-35 jets to Turkey as long as they have this S-400 weapon system, because they claim the powerful radar on the S-400 will be able to scan the planes and figure out their secret stealth or, whatever. And so that was an article from Debka File. Very interesting to see what plays out regarding these weapon systems and the relationship between Russia and China and Iran as a result of this whole interplay and escalation with the killing of Qassem Soleimani. The president of the Council on Foreign Relations, Richard N. Haas, is basically very against what has happened here, which is, again, this is for those of you who, are tempted to just, see, man, it's evil Trump and he's just blowing stuff up, he's going to start war and he's owned by Israel. Again, we'll see what it is, but it's not as simple as that. And one real key of that is when the president of the Council on Foreign Relations is all of a sudden very upset about what Trump has done. Okay, Council on Foreign Relations, for those who, for whatever reason, don't know, is basically one of the key aspects of what they call the Illuminati, right? It's just it's a nexus of extremely powerful people in the private and public sectors coming together. And, sometimes it's in public, sometimes, it's behind closed doors, and they set the course for the world, right? This, of what they call the globalists, the Council on Foreign Relations is kind of right there in the very center, along with the Club of Rome and, Chatham House in the UK, and these different groups all kind of intersect and allow these billionaires and oligarchs and, rulers to come together and set policy for the world. And over the next year or so, you usually see these things just popping up, news stories and developments, and they seem very random, but they're actually planned in advance. And that's why you see a lot of different actors, moving almost as if they had a script, and bringing forth these narratives, whether it's, the LGBT thing, the LGBTQ thing, or the push against anti-vaxxers, to military campaigns, the environmental stuff, the climate nonsense, right? A lot of these things are all coordinated because, again, they're just narratives, and there's not really much reality to any of them, right? It's just narrative, and so they cooperate to keep that narrative in effect. And the president of the Council on Foreign Relations, Richard N. Haas, is coming out and saying some interesting things. So let me just read a few of his tweets. So, and here he's actually, this was December 31st, so this was New Year's Eve. He was saying, real Donald Trump needs to be ready to go to war with Iran or provide a diplomatic off-ramp, right? So essentially he's he's a latter path clearly preferable. But, he's a guy who's not trying really hard to steer away from war with Iran. He wants the proper path for a war with Iran. So, and then he responds when it happens. If reports of killing Soleimani are true, we'd better be prepared for all sorts of Iranian retaliation against U.S. diplomatic and military personnel around the world, giving his symbolic and actual role. Just when you thought the Middle East couldn't get worse, it well might. And so here he continues, and he starts playing out the second and third order effects, and he becomes, more and more upset about this. He says, it would be ironic and worse yet tragic, if, as well as dangerous, if an administration that wanted to reduce the U.S. footprint in the Middle East has set in motion a dynamic that will draw us in much further at a time we face challenges from China and North Korea and Asia and Russia and Europe. And here he continues again. One sure result of the U.S. strike is that the era of U.S.-Iraq cooperation is over. The U.S. diplomatic and military presence will end because Iraq asks us to depart, or our presence is just a target, or both. The result will be greater Iranian influence, terrorism, and Iraqi infighting. Make no mistake, any war with Iran will not look like the 1990 Gulf War or the 2003 Iraq wars. It will be fought throughout the region with a wide range of tools versus a wide range of civilian, economic, and military targets. The region, and possibly the world, will be the battlefield. Here's another one from yesterday. My argument that Donald Trump's decision to target Soleimani was at odds with U.S. as well as his own foreign policy priorities, revealing the lack of strategic discipline and the absence of a rigorous policy-making process. And is another tweet, closing the embassy in Baghdad would be a wretched end to the U.S. relationship with a country, Iraq, in which it has invested so much blood and treasure. But by assassinating Soleimani, the Trump administration just made that outcome much more likely. For those who will argue the departure of the U.S. from Iraq is no loss, keep in mind that it will lead to greater Iranian influence in a critical country in the Middle East, one with large energy reserves, as well as renewed terrorism that will be a threat to Americans along with our friends. And to conclude this report today, I'm going to read this article from Zero Hedge, authored by Craig Murray, titled, The USA Doubles Down on Its Saudi Allegiance. For the United States to abandon proxy warfare and directly kill one of Iran's most senior political figures has changed international politics in a fundamental way. It is a massive error. Its ramifications are profound and complex. There is also a lesson to be learned here in that this morning there will be excitement and satisfaction in the palaces of Washington, Tel Aviv, Riyadh, and Tehran. All of the political elites will see prospects for gain from the new fluidity, while for ordinary people in all those countries there is only the certainty of more conflict, death, and economic loss. For the political elite, the arms manufacturers, the military and security services and allied interests, the hedge funds, speculators, and oil companies, there are the sweet smells of cash and power. Tehran will be pleased because the USA has just definitively lost Iraq. Iraq has a Shia majority and so naturally tends to ally with Iran. The only thing preventing that was the Arab nationalism of Saddam Hussein's Ba'ath Socialist Party. Bush and Blair were certainly fully informed that by destroying the Ba'ath system, they were creating an Iranian-Iraqi nexus, but they decided that was containable. The containment consisted of a deliberate and profound push across the Middle East to oppose Shia influence in proxy wars everywhere. This is the root cause of the disastrous war in Yemen, where the Zaidi Shia would have been victorious long ago but for the sustained brutal aerial warfare on civilians carried out by the Western powers through Saudi Arabia. This anti-Shia Western policy included the unwavering support for the Sunni Bahraini autocracy in the brutal suppression of its overwhelmingly Shia population. And of course it included the sustained and disastrous attempt to overthrow the Assad regime in Syria and replace it with pro-Saudi Sunni jihadists. This switch in U.S. foreign policy was known in the White House of 2007 as the redirection. It meant that Sunni jihadists like al-Qaeda and later al-Nusra were able to switch back to being valued allies of the United States. It redoubled the slavish tying of U.S. foreign policy to Saudi interests. The axis was completed once Mohammed bin Salman took control of Saudi Arabia. His predecessors had been coy about their de facto alliance with Israel. MBS felt no shyness about openly promoting Israeli interests under the cloak of mutual alliance against Iran, calculating quite correctly that Arab street hatred of the Shia outweighed any solidarity with the Palestinians. Common enemies were easy for the USA-Saudi-Israeli alliance to identify: Iran, the Houthi, Assad, and of course the Shia Hezbollah, the only military force to have given the Israelis a bloody nose. The Palestinians themselves are predominantly Sunni, and their own Hamas was left friendless and isolated. The principal difficulty of this policy for the USA, of course, is Iraq. Having imposed a rough democracy on Iraq, the governments were always likely to be Shia-dominated and highly susceptible to Iranian influence. The USA had a continuing handle through dwindling occupying forces and through control of the process which produced the government. They also provided financial resources to partially restore the physical infrastructure the US and its allies had themselves destroyed, and of course to find a near infinite pool of corruption. That U.S. influence was balanced by strong Iranian-aligned militia forces who were an alternative source of strength to the government of Baghdad, and of course by the fact that the center of Sunni tribal strength, the city of Fallujah, had itself been obliterated by the United States 3 times in an act of genocide of Iraqi Sunni population. Through all of this, the Iraqi Prime Minister Adil Abdul Mahdi had until now tiptoed with great care. Pro-Iranian, yet a long-term American client, his government maintained a form of impartiality based on an open hand to accept massive bribes from anybody. That is now over. He is pro-Iranian now. Such precarious balance as there ever was in Iraq was upset this last 2 months when the U.S. and Israelis transported more of their ISIL Sunni jihadists into Iraq to escape the pincer of the Turkish, Russian, and Syrian government forces. The Iranians were naturally not going to stand for this, and Iranian militias were successfully destroying the ISIL remnants, which is why General Qassem Soleimani was in Iraq, why a U.S. mercenary assisting ISIL was killed in an Iranian militia rocket attack, and why Syrian military representatives were being welcomed at Baghdad airport. It is 5 years since I was last in the green zone in Baghdad, but it is extraordinarily heavily fortified with military barriers and checks every 100 yards, and there was no way the crowd could have been allowed to attack the U.S. embassy without active Iraqi government collusion. That profound political movement will have been set in stone by the U.S. assassination of Soleimani. Tehran will now have a grip on Iraq that could prove to be unshakable. Nevertheless, Tel Aviv and Riyadh will also be celebrating today at the idea that their dream of the USA destroying their regional rival Iran, as Iraq and Libya were destroyed, is coming closer. The USA could do this. The impact of technology on modern warfare should not be underestimated. There is a great deal of wishful thinking that fantasizes about U.S. military defeat, but it is simply unrealistic if the USA actually opted for full-scale invasion. Technology is a far greater factor in warfare than it was in the 1960s. The USA could destroy Iran, but the cost and the ramifications would be enormous. Not only the entire Middle East, but much of South Asia would be destabilized, including, of course, Pakistan. My reading of Trump remains that he is not a crazed Clinton-type war hawk, and it will not happen. We all have to pray it does not. There will also today be rejoicing in Washington. There is nothing like an apparently successful military attack in a U.S. re-election campaign. The Benghazi embassy disaster left a deep scar upon the psyche of Trump's support base in particular, and the message that Trump knows how to show the foreigners not to attack America is going down extremely well where it counts, whatever wise people on CNN may say. So what happens now? Consolidating power in Iraq and finishing the destruction of ISIL in Iraq will be the wise advance that Iranian statesmen can practically gain from these events. But that is, of course, not enough to redeem national honor. Something quick and spectacular is required for that. It is hard not to believe that there must be a very real chance of action being taken against shipping in the Straits of Hormuz, which Iran can do with little prior preparation. Missile attacks on Saudi Arabia or Israel are also well within Iran's capability, but it seems more probable that Iran will wish to strike a U.S. target rather than a proxy. An ambassador may be assassinated. Further missile strikes against U.S. outposts in Iraq are also possible. All of these scenarios could very quickly lead to disastrous escalation. In the short term, Trump in this situation needs to either pull out troops from Iraq or massively to reinforce them. The UK does not have the latter option, having neither men nor money, and should remove its 1,400 troops now. Whether the triumph of killing Soleimani gives Trump enough political cover for an early pullout, the wise move, I am unsure. 2020 is going to be a very dangerous year indeed. And that's the end of that article by Craig Murray. Pretty good narrative, I appreciated that. And, interesting again that he puts triumphs in quotes, for, obvious, literary reasons, but also triumph is the name of the S-400 system. Just a funny coincidence. But, so that's the situation. This is all some deep geopolitics stuff. And, I am expecting and hoping that Trump is playing the same game that he has. It's not a clean and fun game for those who have, strong moral principles, which is why most of us aren't very comfortable with it. But as I said when Trump first got elected, Trump is not a pure ideological libertarian. He is a pragmatist, and he will get stuff done. He will get shit done, even if it's down and dirty. And so this is one of those things. I can only imagine that in Trump's mind, this calculus made sense. And that this is a way of inciting anger in the Middle East to the point where we are forced to withdraw, which now appears to be taking place, right? Iraq's parliament has voted in favor of this. They don't have the actual authority to complete that, but the executive of the country does, who also agrees with this. Apparently, he is about to leave the government. He resigned last month. And his successor, the new leader of Iraq, is going to face this same pressure that the existing guy is facing, right? Abu Mahdi. And so it's very likely that in the next couple months, by Iraqi decree, U.S. forces could be legally evicted from the country. And so that is a roundabout solution, a way of getting out of the Middle East. But I think that, again, no president is all-powerful when it comes to the military. They call him the commander-in-chief, but that's really just a title. And it doesn't mean that, he's all-powerful. And it's not like he's the emperor or the supreme, military leader, right? He's basically the one who makes calls, but he's not the one who organizes, the $800 billion and how that's all spent. And so, just like, he's had these roundabout moves in Syria, but it seems like he ultimately wants to get us out of there. I think that's what's happening here. I think this was a way to make a war against Iran in the future just politically unpalatable. If I'm wrong, then it will happen very soon here, but I don't think it's going to happen soon, especially for the reasons that are, technical as much as they are political, of the S-400 system and the cost to American air power that it would incur if any air campaign were to be waged. And I think that would look very politically bad for Trump. I don't think it would really achieve very much. So, it's fire and fury talk from Trump as far as, the 52 targets and whatnot. Yeah, I'm very, concerned about this myself. I'm not poo-pooing it or wishing it away, but I do think that the pattern of action so far leads us to believe that Qassem Soleimani was a one-off target, and of course there's the follow-on, back and forth, but we'll see. It's not a good situation, but I can only hope that Mr. Trump knows what he's doing. If he doesn't, well, his guaranteed re-election may now be thrown into question, and yeah, we'll see. But that's my video today. Let me know if you guys enjoyed this. Give a comment down below if you'd like to continue the conversation, and I'll be talking to you guys next time. Cheers.